Hi, money magicians. How are you? So, welcome to another Money Magic podcast. As usual, I am on the road. Nothing new on this podcast. So, if you're watching the YouTube video, you see me in the car. I'm going to turn my video off after this intro. But if you're listening in on Spotify or Apple or Podbean, then this really doesn't affect you. But I have a really cool guest today. His name is Tapiwa Guzha, and he owns an ice cream shop in Observatory, Cape Town. But we'll dig into why he's on this podcast. He's doing such incredible things with African food and changing the way that we perceive African food. If you've watched or listened to some of the podcasts on here, I had a therapist by the name of Whitney in one of the podcasts. I'm not sure what podcast episode it was, but I think it's in the 70s. And she spoke about the link between money, trauma, and food and how they are interrelated. I just thought this was such a really interesting conversation to have, especially for us around African food and trauma and changing our relationship with food and how that can also change our identities and the way that we perceive ourselves. And just talking also about his entrepreneurial journey in this really, really interesting space. So welcome, Tapiwa. I'm about to turn my video off, but welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So, Tapiwa, please tell us, who are you as a soul? Before you even tell us what you do for a living, how do you define yourself as a soul? And then tell us what you do for a living.
It's actually a somewhat difficult answer to give because I don't really define myself that much. I would say at the very core of it, I would say I'm a person, an animal. And beyond that, I'm not particularly drawn to locked in identities. So I crave an existence that's full of diversity and richness and varied experience and varied connection. So for most people, they'll probably say, I don't know, if someone has to define me in the way that I've heard myself being defined is probably, suppose a healer is what if I had to echo back what people say, but I try to do things I don't like to be a thing. Yeah. So for me, I like having multiple relationships of many souls that are nourishing. I also like doing multiple things. So in the context of today, we're talking about my food work, but that's one very small part of what I do. Yeah, so I don't have a nice, neat answer. It's I would say I'm a human being, and that's beyond that, I don't really care. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So, Tapira, I met you at your shop because I had actually never seen sweet potato ice cream, masonja brownies, really, really exciting things, especially around our traditional African cuisine. So I just wanted to have you please explain to people what it is you do in the food sense, because I don't think I'm actually doing it justice.
So I would say in the food sense, I'm trying to address a few different things and answer a few different questions. But ultimately, the foundational need that I'm trying to address is as Afro-descendant people, so that's Africans of all sorts within the continent and external to the continent in the diaspora. Over many generations, we've lost something and something has been taken away as well. And for me, that's something I would define as like self-esteem or self-worth or ego. And so my work is about rehabilitating some of that loss and some of that theft and some of that damage, some of that wounding in a way that doesn't feel, how do I put this? In a multipotent way, right? So the food is one way I'm doing it, but I got a bunch of other things that I'm doing it in as well. So how do I help a Black person, an African person, African-descendant person recognize that there's a value in who they are, and that value doesn't have to be quantified. It's not an exhaustive resource. It's not a metric. They don't have to earn value. They have inherent value. And consequently, the things that they believe in, the things that they practice, the things that they consume also have a similar kind of value by association. All right. So we have a lot of self-doubt and self-hate around our foods, if we're going to pick a particular example. But that's true in fashion, in music, in art, in architecture. Of course, there's this renaissance that's happening now where people are a lot more Black proud, and this is nothing new, but it's really at the forefront of the conversation at the moment. But historically, since the colonial expansion of the European empires happened, we've been slowly losing self-value, and I'm trying to get people to reclaim some of that self-value. Yeah. And we do that with ice cream as a way of keeping the conversation light while doing heavy work, right? So we make exclusively ice cream that's exclusively inspired by the continent. So either ingredients or natural events like summer, like fresh like December summer rain. We've made that as a flavor. Wild fruits, wild herbs, grains, and also dishes that are indigenous to the continent, but also synonymous with the continent. And things like plantain and maize and cassava that are not from Africa, but are so integral to the African identity that they might as well be African. Yeah. So the reason being is help people see a new way of engaging with their foods, a playful way of engaging with their foods, an additive aspect to their food without trying to minimize our culture and traditions and historical use of those ingredients, right? So I'm not trying to elevate African food. I'm not trying to raise up African food. I'm trying to say, let's have a chat about, do you know you can do more than 3 things with this ingredient? And if you cook this way, you can access more nutrients from it, and. So I can pause now for a little bit. We can expand a little bit more later. I feel like I may end up just talking for the next 45 minutes. So let me pause there. But that's essentially what we're trying to do.
No, I love this so much. And I think that I'm speaking for everyone listening that we're probably all glued to this, which for me leads me to my next question. Can you talk about how colonization has impacted the way that we relate to food and how that then impacts the way that we relate to ourselves? Because I'm just thinking, like most times we expect like 5-star chefs and 5-star restaurants to be Western. That's what we associate with 5-star. But when it comes to our own cuisine, it's very rarely something that we associate with 5-star or something that is supposed to be award winning.
So for me, at the base of this question lies the fact that colonialism is a form of supremacy, right? You have to show a people that you're better than them and get them to see that to be the truth. You also, it's a system that rewards exceptionalism, exceptional individuals in that context. So when the colonial process started, a huge part of it was people were looking for places to do like intensive agriculture in tropical or more less hostile like Northern Hemisphere environments. So like Latin America, Africa, and parts of Asia as well that are more hospitable to growing things like resources like spices and rubber and maize and wheat, sugarcane, all these things to fuel the empire expansions, right? So Europe was trying to get bigger and acquire more resources, and primarily because also Europe doesn't have a lot of land that can keep up with the rest of the world's production capacity in terms of food.
Yes.
Right? So in that expansion into Africa, a lot of the things that we were growing and enjoying, obviously, were a lot of foraged wild things, but also we had some things that had an agricultural element to them as well. With the Europeans coming in, everything then was shifted a lot more aggressively into agriculture. And beyond that, a lot more aggressively into the agricultural produce that they brought in that was important to them. And that was for export, right? And what ended up happening was a lot of the leafy greens that we grew here, a lot of the grains that we grew here, a lot of the fruits that we grew here got displaced. So by things like wine farms, things like maize fields, spinach, all the leafy greens we all now eat, like kale and rapeseed. Most of those things are not from here. Butternut, if we're talking about like South African food and 7 colors, right? That whole menu is
Yeah.
nothing from Africa. Like butternut is not American, beetroot is not from here, potatoes not from here, cabbage not from here, maize not from here.
Wow.
So these are all things that were brought in to use Africa as a resource for production, but also a lot of these foods are like work foods, right? So like if you think about like dishes like macheo or pap, right? That's just like carbohydrates to get you working in the fields, right? Or working for a very long time, a long day. That's not the best nutritional choices you can make is to have like most of your plate being pap, right? But that's for someone who works hard, who works long days, that makes sense, right?
Yes.
And so with that initial displacement of what we were growing, what we came to know as our own cultural foods shifted as well, right? So like now I'm sure that people in the audience right now glitching that maize is not African, you know, and maize replaced
Sorry
things
to
like,
interrupt.
yeah, sure.
I am glitching that butternut is not African. Okay, like I am like glitching right now.
Yeah, right. And what I mean by that is, of course, it's African now, right? We can't take that away. We can't undo that and pretend that it's not a huge part of our identities. But I think it's important to engage with these things with the knowledge that they came from a place, and in their coming here, they displaced something else, right? South Africa is known for exporting mangoes, citrus, bananas, sugarcane, fruits of all sorts like plums, all that stuff came here, was brought here, and it displaced stuff. Wine farms, strawberry farms, right? Especially in the Western Cape here. These are all, and sheep like Karoo lamb, that has nothing to do with Africa and South Africa. So we ended up at a point where we self-identify with this food culture that was imposed on us. And of course, we took our own spins on it and we translated some of our knowledge from, let's say, eating sorghum to eating pap with similar technology being used and similar outputs, different flavors. So things weren't entirely killed off, but ultimately a lot of our histories were erased in maybe a generation or two, right? To the point where now people fight you for like rights to cattle, right? But beef is Indian, right? That's another import, right? We were not farming cattle before. Let me not say like that. Cattle farming and consumption and ownership on the continent is very new in our history, but it's so intrinsic to like lobola negotiations, to I don't know, like twasa things and all these cultural practices, right? And it's important to acknowledge all those things because things evolve and shift, but we must know that we're evolving and shifting intentionally versus someone has changed the story for us and we're none the wiser. Yeah. So starting from agriculture, it just bled into everything else. So now how we cook food is based on maybe like farmer lifestyles, rural lifestyles that were responding to the colonial needs. And if you think about how so many, like usually the word for whiteness, like murungo, mulungo, mzungu, right, can be equated to anyone in a position of superiority. Like your boss, even if they're black, can be called murungu, right? And that's something I see across the continent. People have some kind of white meaning word to address anyone in a position of power. And the reason I bring that up is because our food game is not trying to catch up to that idea of supremacy as well. Like we're trying to be exceptionally good, like white people, right? So even the idea of like fine dining, that has nothing really to do with continental food historically. We're trying to make our food appealing to the global market. Therefore, we have to make it fine dining and worthy of attention in a form that's maybe less authentic. It's modern, and of course, culture evolves, but we are losing a lot in the quest for global acceptance. And for me, it's important to say, do I need someone in Malawi to be eating South African food? I'd probably say no. What about someone in America? Definitely not. That's not necessary, right, at all, in the slightest. Do I need someone in Cape Town to be eating something from Limpopo? Probably not either, right? There's so much Cape Town has to offer for locals and visitors alike. Why are we so obsessed in this global reach and this global output and this global acceptance? It's because we still don't accept ourselves, and we need a white person to say, you are worthy enough. And that's why we all need our MBAs and our PhDs and our MD certificates from these white institutions to say, okay, good nigga, you're clever now, you've made it, right? And we need to question that, right? Why is a chef's knowledge more important than a grandmother's cooking knowledge, right? So I'll stop there. I think you kind of get my point. Like it comes down to supremacy and our quest for acceptance within that supremacy, right? Because if I'm the best chef in Cape Town, finally I've made it. Finally I'm worthy, and finally my food and my people are worthy.
No, I completely hear you.
Mm.
I completely hear what you're saying. So, Tapiwa, I mean, this is completely side note. This is out of interest. What do you mean that cattle farming? I mean, I've always believed that we've had cattle on the continent. Am I wrong about that? I know that consumption of meat at the level that we're consuming it isn't something that we've had in terms of this continent before.
Yeah, so the thing with agriculture is it does a good job of establishing new realities as long facts. Agriculture is really powerful at that. So domestication of wildlife in general is a very new phenomenon in human beings, right? Relative to our evolutionary timeline as an animal, right? Domestication of anything is very new. I think dogs were probably the first thing we domesticated a long time ago. Then everything else varying levels. So like chicken, I think was domesticated in China. And I think beef was domesticated in India, descending from, I think, buffalo species there. Pork, can't remember exactly where it's from. But lamb as well. I think lamb is European, I can't remember. But ultimately, at some point, that domestication happened. I can't remember exact timelines now. And those animals are moved around by people who use those animals and people who need those animals for labor, for food, for leather, for wool, for feathers, whatever, geese and ducks and all that stuff, right? So if you go back far enough, everything is a starting off point, and certainly beef and chicken, to my knowledge, and lamb don't start on the continent, right? But even as you say, in the way we now relate to beef, right? Even that is a newer version of that experience. Like if we're talking about, okay, traditionally we've been using beef or cattle as a resource, primarily was for milk and labor. The idea of eating meat all the time is a very new experience on the continent, because that's like going into an investment fund, right? Like cattle have economic value beyond the labor they provide. They can buy things, they can negotiate for things, they can give you access to resources like land, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, even the idea of going to Pick n Pay every day and going to get meat, yeah, that's a relatively new practice as well.
Wow. Wow. No, that I've known actually, and I find it very, very interesting that when I went vegan, some people would tell me, "Oh, that's such a white thing," and I would always have to point out that, sorry, do you know that on this continent, as you've said, cattle were investments. So a lot of livestock wasn't something that we ate all the time because it would be like eating our. So people actually saved on that. So I wanted to, as we're talking about this, I also wanted to ask, because I feel like one of the things that you're doing right now is reviving the way that we see African food. And that is a form of healing, as you've said, and it's also a form of resistance. Can you tell us how over time African food has been used as a form of resistance and cultural preservation in the face of trauma?
what's really beautiful is if you look at Africans who were taken from this continent a long time ago, and how so many of them went left with seeds for plants. That if you look at like Caribbean food, if you look at American food, and like Latin American food, like there's so much like in Brazil, in Guyana, you can see these are African people. Because, of course, the African people who are blended in with some of the colonial people and also some of the native people to Latin America and North America, right? But you can see things like black eyed peas, things like okra, hibiscus. They are ways to remember where you're from, to hold on to some kind of connection to the continent. And that's one of my favorite things about food and how it can hold on to cultural practice. I think dance is also the same, and music and musical instruments. If you look at Latin American musical instruments and West African instruments, there's a lot of overlap as well. So that's one form of resistance that I really, really appreciate. That's the one that's the most obvious to me that comes to mind is like thousands and thousands of kilometers away, we're still having echoes of the same food experience in some ways. But also as people migrate around the continent, you can see immigrants who always, and in fact, around the world, immigrants, in this case, voluntary immigrants versus like enslaved immigrants, right? Will always find a way of accessing something from home. So you find there's always like a place where the Somalians get their food, a place where the West Africans get their food, the Cameroonians get their food, the Zimbabweans get their food across the world. And those things are being shipped in illegally, legally, they make their way there. And people are trying to find a way to remember home, right? And there's this interesting juxtaposition between like the illegality of that kind of immigrant importation of resources versus like European immigrants in America and them importing their own ingredients into America, right? Like that's like there's a weird double standard there, right? It's a lot easier to export, let's say, plums from South Africa to America versus exporting sorghum to America. Right. And that speaks again to who's the food for and why is the food important to that particular person and who's got the power and the resources in that context. So I love how, despite the potential penalties and fines, food escapes borders and it finds its way to its people. Of course, there's complications around introducing non-native species into a place and disrupting the ecosystem and doing damage there. And there's this constant battle between human needs and nature needs, as if human needs are not part of nature needs as well. So I don't have all the answers around that, but it's a complicated conversation. And I think also just eating our food in itself is an act of resistance, because I'm sure many of us are familiar with the ridicule of being rather familiar with the feeling of being ridiculed for bringing native things to school in your lunchbox in a skaftin, right? So like I used to take pap to school, right? Eating leftover pap the next day in Zimbabwe is big taboo to begin with. Taking pap to school for your lunch while other kids are having ham and cheese or peanut butter and jam or whatever, right? That's already like in itself a form of resistance, because you know there's going to be a price to that choice. And in fact, in my case, it wasn't a choice. It's what the family would pack for you. Is, are you going to go hungry or not? You choose. And so I grew up with that knowledge that my family is quite differently compared to the other kids in the school. And there was nothing like particularly elitist about my school. So that, it's not even a matter of like I was in a private school, something like that. No, I was in a government school. But even that mentality that existed in there where they're like, oh, you're eating sorghum pub, you're eating maize meal pub for lunch. Don't you guys have whatever, blah, blah, blah. Right. And so that's I think almost any human being can relate to that unless their culture has never been colonized. Chinese people are made fun of for stinky tofu, and Koreans for kimchi. If you eat pig's feet or trotters, whatever, there's somebody ready to make fun of you, right? Until it becomes part of like the thing that's in vogue at the moment, that's trendy. I remember getting to a steak, like a bistro in Cape Town, and they had ulusu. Ulusu is tripe for anyone who doesn't know that particular word. They had beef tripe on the menu, and it says like braised ox tripe for 220 rand, right? But
No.
none of us would pay a black person more than 80 rand for tripe, right? We would struggle with that logic, but it's just tripe most, right? That's how we would see it. But once we're in this fine dining environment, then it's like it's elevated, it's braised tripe, it's not ulusu. So just eating our own foods is a form of resistance, it's a form of remembrance, it's a form of protest, it's a form of celebration, it's a form of joy. That doesn't need to be any more than that. We don't have to perform another layer of resistance. Just eat your food, and whoever's got a problem, deal with it.
Thank you for that. So, how do you think food plays a role in food and cooking in particular plays a role in healing in terms of healing a cultural trauma within our communities? And you've already explained how you're using that, but on a global scale, on a larger scale, not global, but larger
Yeah.
scale.
How does cooking and food play a role in healing for people?
Yeah.
I would start off by saying we need to be very, very urgent in realizing that so many systems are evolving right now at a pace we can't keep up with to disenfranchise people of all sorts from being in connection with food, right? So if we think about delivery services, if we think about convenience food in supermarkets, if we think about restaurant experiences, most of those things are about making the cooking experience easy or even non-existent, right? So caveat is I understand some people don't have the time, the budget, the ability to cook every day for practical reasons, whether they've got a big family, working 3 jobs, blah, blah, blah. I get that complexity. And there's a genuine reason why someone needs that convenience every so often and that support from the ecosystem, right? But that's not all of us. But the world is shifting into a place where all of us are being trained to become less reliant on our own capacities, on our own bodies and our own skill, and deferring services to experts and the qualified people who can do these things for us because I'm too inadequate to cook, or I've never been good at cooking, or I'm afraid to cook for you because you're a chef, or blah, blah, blah. All the different excuses, right, that we can mount up for ourselves. So we need to be very careful with how codependent we are becoming and have become on global scale production of food, and food meaning processed products that arrive at your house ready to consume. Really, that's one of the things that I'm really, really tired of and frustrated about, because we're losing very fundamental human skills, right? There's nothing difficult about cooking, but we've heard it so many times. It's such an intimidating thought to think about, can I cook for myself? Can I cook for people? Some people struggle with the idea of making eggs, right? And that's not a thing we can blame on that person. That's a thing we can understand that comes from a system that's telling you you must pay 90 rand for 2 eggs and a slice of toast in a restaurant, because this is the best way to have eggs, and you can't possibly do that at home for like 15 rand, you know. So it starts there for me, is recognizing we're so in trouble. And this is true across the board, right? Like plant medicine knowledge is dying. Basic like gardening skills dying, almost dead. People think if I want vegetables, I must go buy them from somewhere, even if the Spar's around the corner. There's no knowledge being passed on as you grow. I grew up with a lot of that knowledge not being taught to me, but I lived through that knowledge, right? No one took the time to say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to farm now, Tapiwa. Come, let's talk about this. Every morning you go to the field and you farm, right? When you're like 4, they give you like a little baby gardening hoe, so you can also pretend to weed the maize and pretend like you're contributing. And then eventually, maybe like 8, 9, you understand, okay, when I feed the rabbits, this particular weed is good for feeding the rabbits. This one is poisonous because it's tomato, blah, 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 blah. And that's how you learn that skill as a tribal experience, as a clan experience, as a family experience, as opposed to let's go to class for an hour and I will teach you about farming, and then you leave and all you're thinking about is how do I remember this for the exam, as opposed to how do I know this for myself in 40 years, for the people I can teach my descendants, and. So to come back to your question after that big disclaimer, it's one of the things that makes us human is we cook food. Right? I'm struggling to remember right now, but I don't think any other animal cooks food. And it's such a fundamental aspect of the human experience. It's like saying, why would breathing be healing? It's so necessary for me. It's so important that people understand what it means to grow something or to watch something grow from, like right now in my garden outside here, I planted some seeds for like, I think lavender and garlic, chives and onions and blah, blah, blah. And so I got some pepper growing there. Because I like to observe the full transition of that plant. So when you use that plant, you are aware, or that animal, you are aware of what it cost you to produce that life, to cater for that life, to be a custodian for that life, and what the cost is in eating and processing or consuming or burning that life, right? And for me, really, really important, I don't make the distinction between vegan or non-vegan, meat or non-meat. It's a lie to say I eat only plant-based because it's better for life. You're eating life. That's it, right? Yeast is life, bacteria is life, plants are life, animals are life, insects are life. We're all part of the same thing. If you are choosing to consume life, you need to be in touch with what it means to foster life, what it means to end that life for your benefit, and how important it is to be part of that system without feeling shame around being part of that system, right? Because we can't rise above the need for sustenance. That's a basic definition of being an alive organism. You need sustenance, right? So we can't sell ourselves the illusion that we can ascend above the filth of being filthy life enders in the name of food or meat eaters or whatever. We're an animal. It's what we do. And we need to do that well in a way that's responsible, that's balanced with the ecosystem and the environment, that connects to the value of that thing. In Shona, we say pamsoro before you eat food, right? And pamsoro is like an acknowledgement, right, of all that's gone into that meal. So who's cooked it, who's grown it, what's died, what's been eaten, whose land were we on, and then all these other things, right? You are participating in a much bigger practice of being an organism. You're not just a human being who's mastered nature, who can order nature via the phone, right? You need to be aware that you are part of this thing. And that's not possible if you've never seen a dead fish head or pig's head or cattle head or cow's head or whatever, right? Because chicken breast is just like this amorphous thing that has no reality to it, right? I can eat chicken breast every day until I'm dead because I don't have any awareness around the cost, right? It's not an animal, it's chicken breast, right? If I say, here's a chicken, kill it, pluck it, prep it, debone it, or whatever, or quarter it, and then eat it. That chicken tastes different. That chicken feels different. I wouldn't say it's better. I would just say it's different. And there's an acknowledgement you have to make in part of that process. That humanizes you and also animalizes you. It reminds you. You think you're so serious. You're just another thing that's going to die. You're a big part of this machine. And other things are going to eat you. We try to put formaldehyde in our bodies when we die so we can be preserved to perfection. We're going to decompose at some point. Termites are going to get to us. Bacteria are going to get to us. Fungus are going to get to us. We are part of that organism, that global organism. And cooking and participating in your food production is an important reminder to say, we haven't ascended beyond being the silly animal. We're still a silly animal. There's another cog in the food web. Yeah.
Mm. Oh, thank you for that. You know, one of the things that I've written a blog post on this, the
Mm,
concept of food and the food industry and the cooking and cooking for ourselves. What
mm,
you've said powerful because I've pointed out that with money comes the ability to have time, and with time,
mm,
you can go organic and cook. But the way
mm,
that the world is set up and the class systems are set up is that the majority of us in this world are being underpaid. A lot of
mm,
people don't earn a lot, they don't have enough time. I've been
mm,
lucky in that I could create time freedom as well, but
mm,
so few people have that time freedom. And as a result, the system basically forces you to do
mm,
convenience eating,
mm,
to reach for the most, for the easiest option. And even
mm,
people in the corporate space, even if they are super well paid, often you have to be in a two-income household. And
mm,
that means that both parents are working. And if you're lucky enough to be well paid enough that there's one person at home who's able
mm,
to create slow food and cook, that changes everything. But everything is so interconnected, you
mm,
know, it's that when you don't have enough time freedom, you have to use convenience. You have to go the chemical route. You're
mhm.
more likely to get sick. So now you're in the medical system, and
Yeah.
now you're
Uh-huh.
spending money on that. So it's this whole process. And I think that
Mm,
we have to become aware and find ways of understanding how this is all deeply tied at the core of it to money. And
mm,
there's a lot of trauma that is being induced
mhm,
within us around all these systems. And at the core of it, I really, really believe that at the root of it is food, because food is about survival and
mm,
the way that we relationship with food. So thank you for that. And speaking of
mm,
money, I wanted us to talk about what your journey has been like to launching your business. What
mm,
have been some of your challenges as an entrepreneur with educating the market? Have you found any challenges? Have people been
mm.
welcoming? What has this been like?
It's, I think, I chose to do this in a very different way. Um, and that's part of what it means to be able to have the freedoms to make certain kind of choices, right? Like whether it's financial freedoms, time freedoms, lack of dependence freedoms, right? I have chosen deliberately to not marry. I've chosen deliberately to not have children. I've chosen deliberately to leave an academic space because I used to be a researcher. And I've chosen a few other things. I've chosen not to pay black tax. I told my family I'm not paying that. Right? It's a difficult set of decisions that I made, a different set of sacrifices that I made, knowing what I wanted to do. Right? And what I want to do is not possible if you have other human beings dependent on you to such a severe extent. Right? So
Mm,
that's point number one. Point number two is I'm highly aware of the many privileges that I have in the world, right? So I'm a man, I'm a highly educated man who happens to sound highly educated as well. Um, I didn't grow up like really struggling, but we weren't wealthy either. So I've been able to navigate lower income spaces and high income spaces with ease. So I can slide and slip and slide into space very easily. Um, and because of all those things, my voice is a serious voice in terms of people taking me seriously, right? Being on
mm,
this podcast is an example, right? My voice means something
yeah.
because of the many things that I am and that I've done and the choices and sacrifices that I've made. So
Mm,
recognizing those two things, that those two major points I've made, it seemed unjust to not use all that privilege for a greater purpose, right? If someone in my unique set of circumstances can't advocate for Africanness, for Blackness, for culture on the continent, how can we expect people in more trickier situations to try and do that kind of work, right? So what I chose to do then was, I'm going to open my business in a neighborhood that's a good compromise between my safety as an immigrant and my ability to access Black people, right? I came to South Africa in 2005, and fairly or unfairly, the xenophobia that hit the country around 2008 is still part of my internal wounds. I knew I wanted to open in a place that was Black, but I also still had fear around being an immigrant opening a business in a place that was fully Black. So I wanted to open like in Langa or Googs in Cape Town, but I didn't know what that meant for me, right? So I chose to open an observatory, which is close to Langa. An observatory is historically a very mixed neighborhood, but it's also a thoroughfare neighborhood. People pass through OBS to go to many different places. And people walk through OBS, My City, Golden Arrow, Metro Rail, minibus taxi, Uber, your private vehicle, whatever. At the most, 2 combis you can get to OBS versus like if I was to open the cafe in a place like Constantia or Noordhoek or Muizenberg. There are other complications to it, right? Right. Because I live in a coastal city, it makes sense to open an ice cream business in a coastal neighborhood. Opening an OBS from a business perspective is foolish. It makes no sense. Because when it's summertime and it's hot, are you going to go to OBS or are you going to go to the beach in Cape Town? If I was in Joburg in Maboneng, yeah, you go to Maboneng and open, no problem, because there's no beach. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
Right? So that was choice number 1 that has consequences. Consequences is most people don't come to OBS for ice cream, which means, that's business an ice cream place should be. Consequence number 2, because most of the money in the city and in the country doesn't reside in Black hands, and OBS has more Black people in it, it means OBS can't afford me as much as a different neighborhood will be able to afford me, right? That's the other choice I made, knowing I wouldn't make as much money. And also, what's the other point that I want to make? It'll come back to me. So ultimately, the location I chose to open in was not a business choice, it was a cultural choice. I knew I didn't want to be another amazing place in Cape Town that's limited for white people. And that's what Cape Town does. Cape Town does beautiful things in the food industry and in general that tend to be easily accessible to white people or are in primarily white neighborhoods or are difficult to access through physical means but also through financial means and through cultural means. Right. To this day, I know people who are blown away by the idea of going to the waterfront as an activity as opposed to I'm just going to the shopping mall, because it seems so unattainable, such an amazing place to go, but it's just a shopping mall. Yet it's not just a shopping mall. So I knew I had to make choices to refuse to do the business thing primarily. I refused external funding because I wanted to fund myself so I could control the message behind the product and I could control how the product behaves and how it's received and how I interact with the audience and the customer and the community. All those things were important to me, which meant starting the business in kind of like a handicapped position. Like I think maybe 120,000 rand to start the business. And that means buying equipment, rental deposits, renovations, painting, blah, 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 blah. So it was a very slow process of fixing the business up to a certain point. Over the last few years, each year, I'm like, okay, what am I tackling next at this location that I need to improve to get better? And we never closed for renovations. And it was always just me in the beginning. For the first years, it was just me working at the cafe because I wanted to show people, primarily Black people. Oh, by the way, for me, Black means whoever thinks they're Black. If you're an Afro-descendant, you're Black. I wanted to show people the steps that I'm going through. Oh, he's the guy who sweeps the floor, but I thought he was the owner. He's the same person. He's the guy washing the toilets, but why is the owner washing the toilets? I want people to see that's what it means to start a business from scratch with nothing but yourself, right? There's a beauty to it, there's a romance to it, but there's a pain to it. And I also knew I'm going to give this thing 5 years to do the work for the culture. And that 5 years is coming up now at the end of this year. And what I mean by that is making social choices as opposed to business choices. And now I've done my activism, I've done my contribution to the culture. I need to get paid. I've worked hard. So the next phase for me is, how do I now move from this cultural activist position to a business with a cultural component to it, right? Because the way I went in is not sustainable financially, right? I can't expand as aggressively. I can't support my employees as well as I want to be able to. You know, like paying people just above minimum wage. You're just another person. You're just another colonizer, right? You're just another person oppressing your people, right? But the reality is I can't afford to pay them more. I make minimum wage as well. So I'm not like balling out of control. But because I don't have any pressures, I can afford to be a struggling entrepreneur, because all I have to worry about is the 2 people on my payroll and me. That's it. Everyone else in my life is there by choice, and they understand my reality, and they can choose to stay in my life or not. That's up to them. But those 2 people that I pay and me are the people that I'm truly responsible to. In a financial sense. So, of course, then that means I had so many challenges because I was doing it alone. I was doing it alone in that sense. But of course, I had big community and big support. And there was a lot of excitement and joy and embracing by people. And that's people across many identities. What's common to all those people is a sense of adventure, an open mind, and an openness to difference. People who celebrate diversity, who embrace difference as a strong point as opposed to a weird thing or a freak thing. Who are you guys doing this fun thing, right? The other side is the resistance, is the people with a conservative mindset, whether it be Black people with internalized self-hate and esteem issues, or people with supremacy issues who are not Black, who would think Black things are weird or African things are weird, right? And that's a mindset. That's not a race. That's not a gender. That's a mindset. That's a person who's just been brutalized by the world, and they don't know that they've been harmed by the world to such a point that they don't see other people and other people's worth and value. So I would say those are the 2 kinds of people I've encountered in the work. There are themes to those kind of people that we can subdivide, but ultimately it's someone who's got a lot of pain and harm and destruction in their head and mind and heart, and someone who's, despite all our conditioning, is still open and free and excited for difference and for newness and for possibilities and for options and for diversity. So obviously I don't have, in fact, I have no interest in it, but obviously I don't have a big part of the market share in ice cream in Cape Town, because you're asking people to do work by coming to your cafe, right? I have to conceptually approve of the idea of going to eat Mabele ice cream, first of all. Like, I don't even know. Then you show up there, then you see all the names on the menu are weird. You listen to the music playing, it's all African music. The aesthetic is African art. Everything about that in Cape Town is very unusual, right? In Cape Town, we have a lot of the sanitized, very sleek, minimalist kind of like non-committal environments with very poppy, trendy Spotify auto-curated music. Nothing about the food is difficult or challenging or uncomfortable. Anyone can eat it. Bare minimum, almost every menu item can please everybody, right? So vanilla, pistachio, strawberry, chocolate, coffee, peanut butter. Nothing difficult. I just want ice cream. I want it simple. I don't want a headache. Why am I thinking, right? So coming to Tapi, you have to be ready to come do some work, whether active or subconsciously, right? You can't casually walk into Tapi and leave casually. That doesn't happen. You can fumble across us on the road and be like, oh, ice cream. By the time you leave, you realize I didn't come here for ice cream. I had something else. The ice cream facilitated that. But the thing that I'm trying to get people to enjoy is not the ice cream. The ice cream is the bribe to get you to show up. So you're fighting, in some ways, people's minds. Even the ones who want to come, they're still coming and they're like, I have to ignore so much conditioning to enjoy this moment, and to participate in this moment. But it's beautiful ones that break through that, and you can help them access something different for themselves going forward. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I love that. I mean, I have to say, I did feel the same way. I was asking so many questions, but
Mm,
I came there because when I was in Woodstock, I was at the Woodstock market on Saturday, and my
mm,
cousin was like, I think you should go to Tapi Tapi. And I was like, I've been there before. And he
mm.
was like, well, I think you should go again and go talk to the owner because this is the kind of person that you would like to talk to. So I walked in and obviously asked about the ice creams that day. And my only thing was like, how do I talk to to Tapiwa? Like I have questions, you know.
Mm,
But it's actually such a beautiful model. So, what is next for you in the future, and how do we get involved to support this really
mm,
incredible and educational business model? Because, as I've said, I did walk in there and I stayed, I quizzed the ice cream people, I
mm,
quizzed your salesperson before even coming to you. Like, I had so many questions I wanted to know, and I found that so beautiful. So you don't leave the same. You're completely right.
mm. Unless you choose to live the same, and that just speaks to your own baggage. Um, so in terms of help, or support, rather, let's call it support. I think the most important thing for me is, again, let's not fixate on Tapi Tapi in particular. Let's not fixate on the exceptional Negro who's managed to break through, right? For me, I'm interested in saying, how can we correct the system in our own small ways across the board, right? If you can make this world better for another Black person at some slight cost to you and no cost to them, you've done something amazing, right? Um, so for me is wherever you are right now, don't expect Tapiwa is going to come open a cafe there or a business there. I'm never going to do that. I have no interest in doing that, right? But wherever you are in the world, actually, let's speak wherever you are on the continent specifically, there are ice cream shops wherever you are, right? For the most part, or at least you have access to ice cream products, sorbets and maybe like popsicles or whatever, right? It is up to you to go make noise at that business and tell them, listen, you live in Africa, what the fuck? Um, how come your menu doesn't reflect where we live? How come you're not trying to embrace local identities? How come you're not doing something out of, some ice cream places have like 23 flavors or something, like massive display freezers. And not a single flavor reflects anything to do with anyone. Even something as basic as amasi, something as or rooibos. Rooibos is like the easiest cheat someone can do to make rooibos ice cream. They're not even trying. They get a mark for effort, but there's nothing uncomfortable or difficult about putting rooibos on your menu, and people won't even do that, right? So for me, it's really important to say, go and make noise over and over and over and over and over. You want the system to change, you have to be part of that system changing. You can't expect people in government, you can't expect people in business to change things while you're doing nothing. And this is not an accusation, this is just bringing awareness to what we need to be actively doing. The colonial process is 400 plus years. They had crowns and empires worth of resources that they're taking from us that we're using to oppress us, right? And to put all these systems into place, right? This was not an accident. This was a deliberate, violent, long sustained process that had financial backing behind it, heavy financial backing behind it. As individuals, as entrepreneurs, we can do our part. Um, we're not going to change all of it alone. We need government to catch up. We need industry to catch up. We need agriculture to catch up. But our very small contributions start with making noise. Tell them, I'm not going to buy ice cream from you anymore until I see something here. And if you're an important customer to them, they will change. If they don't, go on Twitter, go on Facebook, complain. We need to make noise, right? But that for me helps Tapio. I have no interest in being the only African cafe in Cape Town that sells ice cream. Never mind the whole continent. That's depressing. That's a depressing thought, right?
Mm.
People's instinct to say, oh, but you're going to lose market share and competitors are going to be doing. And I'm like, that's what we should be aiming for. We should be so tired of blackness that once in a while I want Italian food because I'm tired of all this African food. Yes, right? But that never happens. it is so hard to reliably find Black businesses and Black experiences. It always feels like a special day. It always feels like Africa Day or Heritage Day, which is in itself some other nonsense as well. Why are we celebrating Africa Day and Heritage Day on the continent? Because we know we're not Africans most of the time. Because we know our heritage is not priority most of the time. So we have to make a point to say, okay, today let me be Black, because most of your life is not Black. As a Black person, you're a tourist on this continent, living in a European continent. It's wild. It's absolutely wild. So we need to make noise to carve out space and insist that people with that space give some of the space back. And giving space back means making a menu that allows other identities to feel seen and to be represented, to be celebrated. No one is saying change your whole menu, but two of them. If you can make 2 vegan ice creams, 2 diabetic ice creams, you can make 2 Black ice creams. All right, we're not asking for a lot. So that for me is a big way you can support Tapi Tapi, because Tapi Tapi for me is a mindset. It's not a physical location. In terms of if you want to enjoy the experience, then come to Cape Town. If you live in Cape Town, we're an Observatory, and we are trying to see if we can open a second branch next year in Cape Town still. And I may end up opening a third branch in Berlin, in Germany, because as people on the continent, we forget Black people are all over the world, and we forget Black people have been in pain all over the world for a long time, and Black people have wanted to come home, but they cannot for a long time. And sometimes Africans tend to think of only the continent as Africans. And I'm guilty of that all the time. So I went to Germany 2 years ago, and it was the first time I was like, oh, there actually are Black people in the diaspora, right? In a real way that I really was connecting with this thought, you know. I'm an immigrant in South Africa, and I've got plenty of family in England and Canada and America, blah, 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 blah. But I never really thought to say, there are other Black people having the same experience, except they're in a white place. We're in a white place in South Africa, yes. They're in a fucking white place, right? And we need to remember those people as well. So the thought of opening that place in Germany before any other place in Africa is because I think I've got one place in Africa. I need another place somewhere else for the diaspora people who can encounter it there as well. Yeah. So that for me is what the future kind of looks like at the moment. Support by spreading the word, and not the word about Tapi Tapi, by spreading the mindset. For me, you sharing about Tapi Tapi, I will never ask people to do that. I don't want to solicit that opinion and that review. What I want for people to spread is we need to make space for ourselves, and we need to insist that other people make space for us as well, especially on the continent, but that's still true around the world, because we didn't end up around the world by choice for some people, as enslaved people, and for immigration reasons. It's very rare people immigrate from a place that they're happy in. It's very rare people leave their homes to go suffer as an immigrant somewhere else, because things are going so well. I want to move to Bali because my life in Cape Town is perfect, but I just want to go. It's very rare. It happens. But most people are immigrants under duress, under really tough home conditions. So we need to find a way to make those people feel seen wherever they are as well, and be happy wherever they are, and make ourselves seen here, and insist that people see us here. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much, Tapiwa. I think I speak for everyone who's listened to this podcast that this was insanely educational. I am just blown away. I didn't expect that the conversation would go this deep and that I would ask the questions that I ask. Usually, my questions are as a result of the guest and where the guest is in terms of where they're taking us. And this was just incredible. So, how do people get hold of you? How do people contact you if they want to learn more? Talk more, invite you to more podcasts, because I'm pretty sure that is going to happen after this.
So I would say if you want to learn about Tapi Tapi and maybe my personal story and some of the work we've done, that's just a Google. If you Google, they're going to be this is the difficulty behind being an exceptional Negro, right? Is everybody at some point gets excited and obsessed with telling your story to the point where it silences other stories from being heard. The nice thing about that is my story is out there, our work is out there from many different outlets, radio, podcast, print, magazine, TV, documentary. You'll find that story very easily. If you just Google Tapi Tapi or Tapi Tapi ice cream, it will come up very easily. If you just want to do your own deep dive into it, that has nothing to do with my presence and my engagement. If you want to connect with me personally, I would say an email is probably the best way. Uncle Taps, so Uncle UNCLE, Taps TAPS at tapitapi.co.za. And I say email because I take email seriously. If you got something serious to say to me, you're going to take some time, you're going to write it down properly, you're going to send me an email, I'm going to look at it as well properly, I'm going to engage with it. Sending a WhatsApp is easy, sending a DM is easy. But what people don't always know is the time requirement you're putting on someone with such triviality, right? Hey, Tapia, what are your opening hours? Is that a phone call that's necessary, or is that something you can check on Google Maps or on the website, right? But you wouldn't send an email to say, hey, what are your opening hours, right? But on WhatsApp, people can send it very easily, right? So we need to be conscious of people's capacities and time and what it means that you're choosing to send that message and how many other people have sent a similar message that can be found and that you can find an answer to very easily. So if you want to connect with me, I would say really think about what you want to talk about, what you want to connect about, and then send me an email. And then just like with you and I, then we're gonna have a phone call or in-person chat and have a proper conversation and not without minimizing those exploratory moments in a conversation. That first superficial layer of like fluff chat, you can get that information on the internet, right? Once you have the fluff chat context, like when did you start your company? Oh, what's your background in what did you study? That stuff, I don't want to talk about that stuff. I'm tired of talking about that stuff. Not because I'm above it, but because I've just said it so many times. And I'm glad you didn't ask me any of that nonsense. Because you are going to get a very dismissive, not lackluster, indifferent answer. It's almost like auto replies. These are auto responses, right? But if we're gonna have a nice conversation, meaty conversation. Tapiwa, I was in Botswana, I learned about this plant, and I think you'd benefit from knowing about this. I want to come through and talk to you about it. They told me how to prepare it, they told me what it's useful for, blah, 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 blah. I'm curious as to what you can do with it. Actually, can I join you in the kitchen? I also want to cook with it. Blah. Now we're talking. We're doing something useful and impactful. Right. So don't send me DMs, don't send me WhatsApps, send me an email, then we can have a phone call. And if you want to see our Instagram page, is _Tapi_Tapi. Read the captions. I try to take interesting photos and make interesting videos, but what I'm really committed to is putting in substance into the captions. So my captions hit hard. It's very rare that I'll put like a fluff, oh, here's some cool stuff that I made. I do once in a while, but I'll always try to put thought into a caption that helps someone open something intellectually. So don't engage with our social pages as a visual experience only. Read what's in those messages. Really important work. And most of it is not my thoughts. It's thoughts that people have shared with me and imparted onto me that I feel are important to pass on to someone else. So it's not me saying, oh, my ego is so amazing. My mind is such this beautiful place. Come learn my ways. Nah, most of it's nothing to do with me. It's just regurgitating people's wisdom. Yeah, and we're in Observatory, Cape Town on Lower Main Road, number 76, small little cafe, hole in the wall. Yeah, come find us if you're in Cape Town.
And as usual, guys, all this information will be in the description. So if you're watching on YouTube, read the description for the links and for the address. If you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, just read the description. All this information will be on there. And I'm switching on my video for one last goodbye. Just to say thank you so much, Tapiwa. This was an incredible interview. And thank you so much, Money Magicians, for listening. reach out, do your reading, go check out Tapi's Instagram page, engage with the content. I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say. Share your thoughts in the comment section. And of course, if you love this, please share with the people in your lives. Share the YouTube links, share the podcast links. Let people listen in. If you know there are people that need to hear this content, need to hear Tapiwa speak about what he's spoken about today. Really, really deep and insightful stuff. Please share, let them get this knowledge. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next podcast.
Yes.